I can almost hear the whippoorwills sing their pretty little love songs in the night. I wake up on Sunday, their church bells ring. Don't do it up here, that just don't seem right. So take me back to West Virginia, heading home unless you've lived there. That green grass grows into your very soul. People may call us backwoods kids, oh, but it's still the one that I've been at West Virginia.
Oh, and good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Boogs. If you would turn off your cell phones at this time, thank you. Come to order, please. I have the floor. Next Tuesday, May 26th, the St. John's Bible, Art, Scripture, and Community with the Venerable Joshua Sachs, Rector of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church here in Wheeling. So on the 2nd of June, the last program before I go on vacation, will be 100 Years of the Mother Road, Route 66, with the Victor Samalot Duo. So it'll be a musical journey down Route 66. Get your kicks and all that. Never came through West Virginia, of course, but we're going to pretend it did. Joe Roxby is here today. Remember Joe? It's been a while since he's been here, so we're happy to have him back. He has a bachelor's degree in history from West Liberty State College. He's a graduate of West Virginia State Police Academy, 25 years of local law enforcement experience on the streets of Wheeling as a patrol officer and a supervisor. He was formerly an Ohio County magistrate. He is, are you still a magistrate? Are you still a magistrate? No, I'm retired. Okay, he's retired. I wasn't positive. He is, thank God, he's a published author. Of course, you see one of his books up here, Heroic Age Tales of Wheeling's Frontier, and also Lost Legends of Fort Henry. And he's here today to tell us about a fascinating character named of Sam Mason. Here's Joe Roxby.
Thank you, folks. It's an honor to be here. I was going to say I normally do something to gin up the crowd, but you guys sound like you're already pretty wound up. Do they have the punch bowl over there somewhere, but I didn't know about? Anyway, it's an honor to be here. This is certainly, from my perspective, one of the premier lecture series around the area. And I also have to offer some thank yous to Ohio County Library. Years ago, when I was doing research for a lot of that, they were very kind to me. Occasionally they would let me make off with reference works and things that they normally don't let out of the library, so I could give them a closer examination. So I am very much into their debt and very thankful. It's kind of like coming back home to hear this. Anyway, folks, it's good to be with you. A couple of thoughts here. We talk about Sam Mason. First off, he was Wheeling's first, in some ways, had there had been more mass communications and things like that. He may have been Wheeling's most famous outlaw as well. And as you'll see, this also, his time period, what happened, also ties in very neatly with our 250th anniversary. Most people, when they think about crime and famous criminals and things like that in Wheeling, what's the first things you think of? You think of Bill Lias. You think of Paul Hankish. And there's enough older faces here. I mean, most of those folks were around in our lifetime. Sam Mason actually goes back literally to the founding of the town. Near as we can tell, he probably came to the area about 1774, 75, right in there. There's no real mention of him as for instance, the Battle of Point Pleasant and things like that. However, he becomes very prominent about the time of the American Revolution. And what's fascinating about this guy, when you hear his story, I mean, you wonder if you're talking about the same guy. His first time, he starts out, he's a road builder. He's captain of a militia. He's, among other things, a magistrate in early Ohio County. After that, he turns brown water pirate. He becomes one of the most feared and bloodthirsty outlaws along the lower Ohio and Mississippi rivers. Now, once years ago, when I gave this talk, some lawyer jumped up and says, "Hey, Roxby, it's nice to know you still got some career advancement ahead of you." But anyway, 1776, 1777, he's actually, Ebenezer Zane, and I believe Conrad Wheat or Conrad Stroop were hired to lay out the road from Fort Henry to Monument Place. That's probably the oldest stretch of the national road, Route 40, that I know of, but he was actually responsible for doing some of that. 1777, the famous Council of War. American independence had been declared. They met, they realized there was going to be clashes. The militia, they had a group, they had people get together there, they organized, I believe it was 9 militia companies, all right? And he was made captain of one of them. And it speaks very highly of him, or at least what people thought of him. Back in that day, just like the Civil War and the Revolutionary War, those militia units elected their own officers. He is described physically as a big man, 6 foot, 200 pounds, husky, tall, strong. And one of the prominent things, he had a wolf tooth that protruded apparently very prominently. It certainly would have made him quite distinguishable. Beyond that, I'm sure he would have been today some dentist's dream. For the fees, I mean. We go on to 1777 is when he really begins to show his mettle. When the Indian raids around here prior to the first siege of Fort Henry, that summer, they came upon the Ohio Valley in full fury. What the British had done with their Indian allies, they held them in check. And what they did not want was pell-mell raiding, a little here, a little there. When they turned them loose, they wanted them to hit the entire western frontier. They wanted them hit all at once. The idea being that if they did that, these people could not go east to enlist with Washington. They'd have trouble sending him horses and supplies and things like that. They wanted this area tied down. Of course, the Indian nations had their own reasons for fighting, but in many ways they were very much mercenaries for the British, the same way the Hessians were in earlier wars, or in the war in the East. There's raids all summer, and to put that in perspective, these militia that go out there, those people that enlisted in that, they were very, semi-trained at best. They were not professional soldiers. They were citizen soldiers. They were beginning to learn their way. However, when they went out against the Indians the first time, they tended to get slaughtered in droves. It'd be just like if we picked 100 guys at a football game and said, go up on the hill there's 10 Navy SEALs, go take them out. Those guys would get killed in droves. And that's pretty much what happened to the first militia groups. Sam Mason, to his credit, led those people out there, and there was no, I don't know that he necessarily counted coup there, but he gave them a merry chase, and he certainly worked at it. Where he really comes to prominence is the first siege of 1777. Take you back to kind of establish his part in that. Prior to the last of August, they had heard that a large-scale raid was coming to Fort Henry. Fort Henry was going to be put under siege, whatever. Of course, Colonel David Shepard musters all 9 militia companies. He has them there at the fort. The fort is packed and ready to go. Of course, again, the Indians are nobody's fool. They're not going to walk into a buzzsaw. They're sitting there. They have the area laid out, reconnoitered, and they're watching. So what happens? Finally, Colonel David Shepard says, these men are eating up too many supplies. Nothing's going to happen. So he sends 7 of these militia companies home. 2 of them remain. One of them is Captain Mason's company, and the other one is Captain Joseph Ogle's. They're there. Again, September 1st, you remember the scenario. James McMecken has had enough. He sends a slave and a bondservant up to the top of Whitting Hill to retrieve his oxen. They are ambushed by the Indians. Another group goes out. They're ambushed. So finally, what they don't know, the Indians have now decided, now that the fort is lightly defended, they've decided to make their attack. They are strung out basically across what we think of today as Vineyard Hills, watching to see what happens. And they've only shown their hand just enough when at the top of the hill. There's only a few Indians that they've seen. The idea is they were tremendous at, for lack of a better way to put it, run and gun warfare as light troops are. They were probably the finest light infantry of their day in this type of battle. However, the one thing they lacked was siegecraft. Like all light troops, they're not heavily equipped. So the only way they can get inside that fort is they have to lure the defenders out, or have the defenders let them in. Of course, if they can do it, the defenders are going to have none of that. The Indians have tried 2 times to lure the defenders out of the fort to no particular advantage. So now, about 8 in the morning, these first events happened about 6 o'clock in the morning. About 8 in the morning, down here, it's a real foggy morning. The area around the Civic Center is a large cornfield. And there's Indians down there, and they begin shooting hogs, knocking down corn, things like that. And of course, from the top of Colonel David Shepard's, at the top of the fort there, he sees them. And what he does, he only sees a few Indians, and he wants to disperse them. So what he does is he sends Mason, his company, out there to just go chase him out. So again, it's a September morning. You folks lived around here long enough. You know how it is when the weather is cool. You get that fog that lays down the bottom along the river. It's the very sort of thing you had this particular morning. Mason and his company comes out down from Fort Henry, probably about the area where 12th Street is. They begin to form a skirmish line. Right here we have the attack of Fort Henry. I would simply notice, as far as that sign, that's basically would represent about the southeastern corner of the fort, roughly. I would simply comment, perhaps the orientation of that needs to be north-south so that people get to see the backside. Because essentially what they have on that sign is one side describes the first siege, the other side describes the second. They're certainly both notable events. But anyway, this is where this is occurring. This is what Sam Mason would have been looking down and seeing down to the far end. You see down there beyond the tower, that's down there around there where the cornfields would have been, where these Indians were demonstrating. Well, hell, now Mason takes his company out, they fan out, form a skirmish line, begin to follow the Indians. Well, again, they have only seen maybe half a dozen Indians. These Indians, as they approach them, these Indians move off to the east, probably right literally. They could have been walked over this area where the library is. That's about as personal as a battle gets. The militia, Sam Mason's militia group follows them till they get out, probably around the area, out around Channel 7, or by my own reckoning, looking at the lay of the land and the descriptions, I would say it's actually closer to down where Karen Bowers or Tailor Made Printing is. That area right there, Sam Mason's militia company, you figure about 25 men. Oh, I'm sorry, I think there were, yeah, that would sound about right for his company. 25 men. They're fanned out and they're following these Indians. When they get out there in this area, literally all hell breaks loose. What they don't know, there are at least 100 and possibly even a couple of hundred Indians spread out what they call an L-shaped ambush. Some of them were along the creek bank and some of them were in a line directly facing them. The first of what really tripped the ambush, out of the fog, Sam Mason and his sergeant, a man by the name of Steele, see two Indians materialize out of the fog. Everyone brings their weapons to bear and fire, and after that, literally all hell breaks loose. Now, the people in this, we actually have, for the first siege of Fort Henry, from one of the missionaries, we actually have almost he wrote a letter, and it almost reads like an after-action report for the Indians, how many were killed and how many wounded. The thing is, you read these old frontier accounts like, well, these settlers didn't waste their shot, and they shot an Indian every time. That's nonsense. They were like anybody else under stress when they're shooting. Their shooting skills degrade. And theirs did too. When the battle was all said and done, there were 3 Indians killed. And the irony of it is, Sam Mason probably killed 2 of them. He killed the first one, the initial exchange, and the second one, he's wounded and trying to get away. And another man who was dying threw him a rifle, and he turned around and shot another Indian. After that, he lays there until that siege is over. He cannot get back to the fort. He's wounded, can't move. So he's trapped there. But anyway, after that, he's certainly very, very highly thought of. And again, had he not had his subsequent history, his name would have been enshrined for what his part in that siege. His name would have been enshrined with the Wetzels and the McCulloughs and the Zanes and everybody else who were also the earlier frontier heroes. But you'll see there were certain reasons why his name was more or less erased out of history. At that time, he also had a tavern. Near as we can tell, this tavern would have been about the bottom of Wheeling Hill. If you're wondering, the reason I had the picture of generations up there, because that's a pretty fair approximation of where his tavern would have been. He had that down there and that area was referred to, if you get into the old manuscripts, as at that time they referred to it as Mason's Bottom. He had that tavern there from probably about 1777 to 1782, because and there are other reasons that make me think that. Further up the hill, I put that right there. Further up the hill, there's a ravine, and back up in that ravine, most people don't know about it, is a cave. That's just a natural thing. You have a water supply, you have natural refrigeration. Your tavern, if you're at the bottom of that hill, you're right there along the major artery of traffic. That's probably where his tavern would have been. So when if you happen to go to Generations today, you're probably pretty close. Anyway, he maintains that tavern till 1782. And after that, you see him kind of drift out of local history. There's no mention of him. People don't talk about him, except one man by the name of George Edgerton writes something to the effect of, was rather derogatory. He says, he was a horse thief from the start. There must have been some dark things about him, but anyway, you see him begin to drift out of the area. The next thing you hear, he goes down around the Marietta area with his family. Apparently he had a couple of bad sons and son-in-laws too. He's down around there. The next he starts his hand into the life of crime. The first thing he's doing is land swindles. And again, one of the things about Mason, he's better educated than people for the time. There are letters written in his own hand. He was literate, which was not common on the frontier. He's involved in some land swindles. And then after that, a little further, after a couple of years, he gets down to a very infamous place called Cave and Rock. Excuse me, have any of you folks ever heard of that? It's a big cave. It's along the Ohio River. It's about 50 feet wide, 25 feet high, and about 100 feet deep. But what he does down there, he sets up a tavern. A lot of you folks here are probably old enough to remember. You remember the movie How the West Was Won? When they're going down there and James Stewart's waylaid by Walter Brennan, the dangerous old tavern keeper who murders people. That guy is based on Sam Mason's character. Well, anyway, Sam Mason now he's into crime with both feet. He starts in right in the 1780s, and not only that, he begins to commit murder among other things, but he's involved in other things too. But the murder is on a wholesale scale. When what he did, he decided to again employed his trade as a barkeeper, but with a decidedly deadlier twist. He puts up a sign out front of the place that says Wilson's Liquor Vault and House of Entertainment. Well, if the liquor vault wasn't bad enough, the House of Entertainment meant it was a bordello. Of course, these riverboat men are both quite anxious to try their hand at both. They're going up there beaching their craft, and they're walking in there, and nobody's coming out. They might as well cross the river Styx right there. He literally committed murder on a wholesale level, and these people go in, no one comes out. And of course, then he's floating the cargo and the boats down to Mississippi and selling it. Of course, again, he's with thieves. Some of the money makes it back, and some of them doesn't. But with that, he turns to murder wholesale. So I'm sorry, a couple other things I'm missing here. Before he goes south, what he did was other things he did in the terms of service to the American Revolution. He was with George Rogers Clark when he went out west, very heroic. He was also 1779, that expedition that went up to through Pennsylvania into the lower parts of New York. What they were doing was raiding the Iroquois home country up there. That was part of the left. Sullivan's raid by George Washington was the right hand of that, 1779. But anyway, we digress. He opens his place, and if this is possible, he's with a band of murder-hardened outlaws. And he expands his criminal enterprise in the sense that his place becomes more or less a one-stop shopping center for crime. He's got prostitutes there, he has liquor there, stolen merchandise, among other things that float around the cave are what they referred to them as coiners. They were in reality counterfeiters. They counterfeited coins, and either make them out of base metal, or sometimes, if they had a little real gold, they would melt it down with lead to, shall we say, further their profits. But anyway, he had a quite lively criminal exchange going on there. And about that time, if it's possible, he came on to two people who were more dangerous than he was. They were two brothers called the Harps. I don't know if you've ever read about them in history, but they, for my nickel, they were probably two of the most dangerous psychotic killers to ever set foot on American soil. They were probably, the two of them are probably credited with 39 victims, and they'll play a part both in Sam Mason's story here and later actually his demise. But anyway, there were two of them, very dangerous people. They joined with Sam Mason's band. At one point, right around 1799, they robbed a boat, and for one reason or another, the Harps took one guy, and they decided they were going to torture this man. So they basically took him up high, took him away from everything else. Now, where these outlaws are on a beach down there by the river. There's a high bluff right by them. These outlaws take the guy, they bind him to a horse, basically naked, blindfold him, and he blindfolded the horse too, and then drove it over the cliff, and it lands down in front of among these outlaws. Well, they thought this was hilarious. They come down, ha ha ha. And if it's possible, these people have actually offended the senses of murder-hardened outlaws. These outlaws grabbed their guns like, "You people got to leave," and they drove them off. And the Harps briefly disappear out of Mason's orbit. Shortly after that, they caught up. Big Harp is killed. Little Harp escapes. About that same time, things start to get hot for Mason. People around there have decided they've just had enough. There's not a lot of real law down there, so people do what they do. You have vigilantes or quote-unquote regulators begin to chase them down. Well, Sam Mason always had a really good sense of this sort of thing, so finally he decided, it's getting a little hot for me. Maybe I need to drift south. So he drifts on further south down toward Natchez. And again, at this point, he's also robbing people on the river, and he's also robbing people on what they call the Natchez Trace. If you've never heard of that, the Natchez Trace is a The only way people could trade here, riverboat traffic was by and large one way. It would float it down. They would sell hogs, corn, things like that to New Orleans, which was a ready market for them. And they would break up the boats for lumber and walk back. For Mason, this was like a double-edged opportunity. If he didn't rob the boats going down, it was even better. He would rob the people coming back. And they had money, actually hard coin, which was hard to find on the frontier at the time. He made quite a life of that for a while. Finally, his murders become the talk of the entire territory. Two colonial governors are about to band together to try to run this man down. But what Sam Mason has been doing to this point, on the far side of the Mississippi is Spanish, this side is American. Well, he's been toe dancing, basically committing no crimes on the Spanish side, and all his robberies and murders and things like that were on the American side. Well, things, sometimes the ground comes out from under your feet when there are other offenses that simply affect you. And for Sam Mason's case, it was probably a guy by the name of Napoleon. Napoleon, of course, rises to power in France. He takes Louisiana back from the Spanish, and now Sam Mason doesn't have a very comfortable place to be, because the French are a lot less forgiving than the Spanish. Finally, he's captured and he's taken down by boat. He's captured, and whoever what's the word I'm looking for, the French authority was at that place did not have the ability, the legal authority, to extradite him. From having been in the business of extradition, sometimes they're tricky enough between states. Between two foreign governments, it's even more so. So basically, Mason and his gang had to be sent south, further down to a French administrator of higher authority to actually make his transfer. Well, again, just like Billy the Kid or Bill Doolin, he makes this, what's the word I'm looking for? Dramatic escape. He makes a dramatic escape from these people. He goes into the woods with with a good many of his gang that are there. And the people that go to chase him simply can't catch him. From his time on the frontier here, he's simply too expert a woodsman. They cannot. He gives them the slip rather easily. Interestingly enough, one time, around that same time, right around probably a few years earlier, 1795, he steps out onto the trail to rob someone coming back from Louisiana with money. And who does he come across but Louis Wetzel? He took a look at Wetzel and just waved him on. And I'm sure he was smart. He would have known who Wetzel was and what Wetzel was. He would have actually probably known he was a teenager when he lived up here. And of course, by that time, Wetzel was a living legend. You know, people know who he is. He has acquired the title Death Wind from the Indians. He's very famous in his own right. I'm sure Sam Mason realized to rob someone like that and try to murder them and fail, you're signing your own death warrant. This one thing Wetzel could be was vengeful. His anger would know no season. It would be essentially like having a heat-seeking missile locked on you. Mason thought the same way and let him pass. Again, his depredations are the talk of the entire territory. So finally, he gets an ending literally worthy of Hollywood, the way this works out. They're desperate to catch this guy, and they can't do it. They have these two nondescript vagrants on minor charges in the jail, one of these towns down in Mississippi. These two guys say, "You cut us loose, we'll bring you Sam Mason's head back." Now, by this time, Sam Mason has something like $2,000 reward on his head. To put that in perspective, at that time, that would have been like the wages of a 4 years' wages of a skilled working man. That was a lot of money. And again, from their thing, it's kind of like, if we cut these two guys loose, if they bring them back, that's great. If they don't, we're rid of a couple of fools. Well, sure enough, a little while later, these guys come back, and they come back with Mason's head in a ball of blue clay. And several people look at the guy to identify. Curiously enough, the one who will not identify him is Sam Mason's wife. And the reason being for that, she does not want the men who murdered him to get the reward. But anyway, it's pretty much decided that is Sam Mason, and these men have the reward. And these two guys are the toast of the town for a little bit. Everyone, wow, you killed Sam Mason and you brought him in. Well, suspicion begins to grow. People look at that and they say, we think that one of the horses that guy's riding is stolen. And someone else comes up like, oh, something's not right here. And finally, a boatman coming down, they asked if anyone might know who these two men are. And one of the boatmen walked up and looked at the guy and said, "You're Little Harp." Of course, people's reaction would have been like if I told you Count Dracula was sitting over at the table there. They were like aghast. And the guy says, "If you're Sam Mason, you have a cut right under your breast where you and I got into a knife fight." They grabbed the guy and pulled his shirt off, and sure enough, it was there. So Little Harp tried, convicted. Right before he gets ready to be hung, he escapes. But again, there's such a hue and cry in the area, he makes it about 20 miles. They're captured and hung. But anyway, we digress a little bit, but certainly quite a bad end for Sam Mason. Maybe in some ways quite fitting. He was hunted down and captured by someone perhaps even more terrible than he was. But again, some final thoughts on his success in Outlaw. Sam Mason's career, he had about a 20-year run of it. When you look back, you look at the American Wild West, maybe the James Gang had something even close to that, and they only made it about 15 years. Your other people like the Wild Bunch, Bill Doolin, people like that, nowhere near that. They, again, if you look at it in terms of success like that, he certainly had a good career run. Or if you want to look at it even a grimmer way, on a body count, this man had obviously his body count would have run into dozens, both maybe what he did either what he did personally or what he had done by other people. But anyway, it was quite a terrible career, and it was a description of him written by a contemporary, I believe it was James Audubon. Here we go. It said, "The name of Mason is still familiar to many navigators along the lower Ohio and Mississippi. By dint of industry and bad deeds, he became a notorious horse thief, forming a line of worthless associates from the eastern part of Virginia, a state greatly celebrated for its fine breed of horses, to New Orleans, and had a settlement on Wolf's Island, not far from the confluence of the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, from which he issued forth to stop flatboats and rifle them. His depredations were the talk of the whole western country." Anyway, we come to the end of Sam Mason there, and do you have any questions?
I'm on my way with the mic. Please wait a second. I can't walk that fast.
So is there any explanation of what drove him from being a hero to the criminal he became?
That's truly one of the great mysteries. Like I said, given his service to the American Revolution, particularly in the early years of it, 77 here at the first siege of Fort Henry, George Rogers Clark, the Broadhead's expedition up the Allegheny. No, there's just. On the other hand, I was thinking about this coming in here. I had a lot of years in the bad people business myself, and you kind of make. People don't just jump up and start committing murders, okay? It's one of those things you more or less drift into, in the sense that first it's crime, it's theft by deception, and it's not by deception where you're robbing people, and then pretty soon, it's what's the Catholic faith has a term for that. They call it the searing of the conscience, okay? Pretty soon you become less and less responsive to moral stimulus, to where you become basically amoral. But it's a gradual thing, and I suspect that's more or less, you see Mason drifting into, by my reason, he more or less follows that pattern. But no, like I said, it almost looks like you hear that biography, almost makes you look like you're thinking about two people, or you're hearing about two different people.
Another question?
Did he have an actual place where he lived, or is he just, drifting around the whole time, like his, besides the cave place, where did he live? Did he just go along the river and, committing these crimes, or did he actually have like a house and things? Well, he had a wife, right? So he had to have a house, I guess.
He did, but he moved. He stayed on the move, okay? As far as the places he had when he was on the lower, the lower parts of the Ohio and Mississippi River, I could not say. Here, we can say he was down there. His place was around generations. He had a piece of ground there. They literally referred to that as Mason's Bottom.
Okay, thank you.
Another question?
Anyway, I will note this,
Since you said there wasn't much written about him, how did you find out all this information?
What I mean written about, sometimes when you're studying historical things, you'll trip across something from somewhere else. I mean, I may have been researching something about Lewis Wetzel, and I found something about Fort Henry or the Zanes or something like that. Sam Mason keeps popping up here. That's what they're actually a lot of a good bit of the earlier stuff we have around here. Some of it comes from George Edgington, who was a contemporary of Lewis Wetzel and those people. Some of it comes from Lydia Boggs Shepherd. She was the one that actually gave us the description from the Draper manuscripts of like what happened at the first siege of Fort Henry to Mason.
You've given a good description of him and his lifestyle.
For what it's worth, a couple of historians, and it was notable, they referred to him as the first genius of Western outlaws. And there's also another Wild West author has written about it. There's almost like a linear trait. You can trace this almost linear. This guy was in this gang, and they walked through it. I mean, this goes literally from about Sam Mason's time clear down through the 1930s. The last people in that generation would have been like Pretty Boy Floyd and Dillinger and people like that, the Oklahoma Bandits. But I mean, it runs right down through the Doolins, from the Jameses and the Doolins and the Daltons and all, who were all cousins, by the way.
In all these spills, you talk about Fort Henry. Are there any sketches of the old Fort Henry?
There actually, I may have it in the back of that book. There's a hand-drawn sketch by Lydia Boggs Shepherd. All right. There's a hand-drawn sketch, and it was done by Lydia Boggs Shepherd. It was done many years after the fact, but it's the closest thing we have to a real drawing. I was many, many years ago when I first was looking into this. I was privileged to see some of the things up in Ogilvy Institute's archives, and there were letters from other good historians who'd written like to the War Department and things like that. The problem was, just to let you under, like for instance, I can tell you with some certainty what these British forts look like, because the British made drawings of them, sent them in, things like that. These militia forts, no. There was no, they built them, they were there for a while, and then they were gone. Now, Fort Henry, again, was a government fort. It was not a family fort, all right? Meaning it was commissioned by, essentially by Lord Dunmore. But the only thing we have, the closest thing we have to a drawing is a hand-drawn thing by Lydia Boggs Shepherd for Dr. Lyman Draper. Now, again, many years after the fact, of which you kind of have to watch. What she said doesn't match what she drew, so you have to read into that very carefully.
Where would you find those? Are they somewhere in a museum, or the sketches, or?
There's a copy of it in the back of that book.
Okay, that's fine.
But they actually come from the Draper.
I'd like to see it.
They actually come from the Draper manuscripts, which are, I believe, held by the Wisconsin Historical Society.
Hey, Joe. I have a online question. Is there any existing illustration of Mason or description of what he looked like, his height, weight, etc.?
The best thing I had was about 6 foot 200 pounds. I believe that comes from Lydia Boggs Shepherd. Oh yeah, he again put that in perspective. An average man at that time would have probably been 5'6", 5'7", $140. So Mason was a big, strong boy.
Got another question over here?
I want to ask a question just to make sure you earn your money.
This is my disreputable neighbor, by the way.
Last name of Mason. Do we know anything about his early upbringing? You know, if it's unusual to be educated and read, do we know if his family had money or ministers or?
That's actually a good question. He supposedly, there's a Mason family in Virginia that's well-heeled, well thought of, and things like that. Supposedly, he was related to them. It's just a funny thing about, how do I want to say this, the way Virginia was settled. When people came from England to settle in Virginia, they settled it in bands. For instance, like that neck where he would have probably come from, they think of those counties along like the Maryland, West Virginia border that come down through there. They call that the northern neck of Virginia. Most of those people, when they came from England, came up around the border states, the border of Scotland. And by the way, we talked about the harps. The harps were, among other things, they were supposedly Scottish. They spoke with a Scottish brogue, and they, best guess probably would have been from North Carolina, where a lot of the Scots had settled.
There's a question up this way.
Do we know where he was buried?
No, that was.
Why not? I mean, you said that he
the
was.
The people that did it probably weren't much prone to giving much of a funeral. I mean, this is a man. The guy that killed him was a mass murderer, for God's sake.
Any more questions? All righty. Well, thank you so
Well, anyway,
much for
folks,
being
that's the story
here.
of Sam Mason, the first genius of Western outlawry.